Hi, I'm Jason.
I'm Fran.
This is Bo Peter.
And I'm Nicole. And this is Marketing for What Matters, where we explore how marketing paired with a regenerative mindset can uplift humanity, heal the planet, and still achieve profitable business growth.
Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Marketing for What Matters. I'm your host today, Fran, and I'm thrilled to be introducing our guest, Lauren Truslow. Lauren is the CEO of 3D Enviro, a small women-owned environmental remediation firm that focuses on preventing hazardous materials such as mercury and asbestos from entering the environment and causing a whole lot of problems for the environment and public health. Lauren has worn many hats in her business and personal life, and I'm excited to share our conversation today where we discuss how motherhood has actually made her a more effective business leader. Lauren also shares her incredible journey to sustainability from her early days exploring nature with her family to her educational and career path in environmental science. She talks about the importance of understanding how our health is driven by our relationship with nature, the challenges and rewards of being a female leader in a male-dominated industry, and the unique perspective that all of this lends to her work. We also dive into the critical role of education in environmental advocacy and the role of leadership in building a dedicated, enduring team. I think Lauren's story is really a testament to the often unspoken and intangible factors that ultimately lead to lasting change and effective leadership. And I hope that anyone listening, especially young women and mothers who may be questioning their role in the workforce, feel inspired and empowered by their own unique perspective and feel moved to share that perspective in their careers and in the sustainability conversation. So without further ado, let's roll the tapes, and here's the episode. Welcome everybody to the Marketing for What Matters podcast. My name is Fran. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm really excited to be here today with Lauren Truslow. She's the CEO of 3D Enviro, a small women-owned environmental remediation firm. She's also a longtime environmentalist and sustainability advocate, a mother, and a marathon runner. Lauren, today I really want to talk about your work and sustainability, but first, can you tell us a little bit about you and your journey to this point? What has been your journey to sustainability, and how did you come to the work that you do today?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me on the pod, Fran, and thanks to Peaceful for reaching out. I have had quite a journey into sustainability. I think it started though, I think my mom and dad have always had a love for the outdoors. And so at a young age, I feel like it was cultivated. Like we went camping when we were little, and my dad always wanted to come back to Virginia. He grew up in upstate New York and always wanted to come to Virginia because as a child, he would come to the Shenandoah National Park and go camping. And so he wanted to come back to Virginia to go to college. And so he went to Washington and Lee and Lexington, which is like, beautifully tucked into the Blue Ridge Mountains. And they always wanted to come back here because of that. So I think it started at like a young age and then sort of just was cultivated every step along the way. Hopefully we're doing the same with our kids too.
Yeah. So your journey was really began and cemented by your parents. Was there any other, as you grew into adulthood and adolescence, was there any other forays into sustainability that you took, career-wise, extracurricularly? How did you take that sort of foundation that your parents had set for you and really turn it into your own vocational purpose?
Yeah, I think if I think about like my journey into sustainability and environmentalism, I think that I grew up just like a lot of kids did in a neighborhood and loved riding my bike around, but also really felt a draw to the outside. And I think parenting was like a little bit different when I was growing up. And I feel so old saying this, but like my sister and I would just like go into the woods and play for hours. Mm-hmm. Like that's just like what I remember of my childhood. And I don't even think when I say woods, I mean, it was probably like an acre in an urban neighborhood. That's where all the kids sort of collected, and there was a creek back there. And I just remember playing in the creek for hours. Like we would come home disgusting. And then from there, I feel like, I went to, when I was in high school, I loved this nature camp. I was a counselor at this nature camp. It was called ARC. It's here in Charlottesville. It's on Panorama Farms. My best friend's family had a conservation easement on their farm. And so we would just like muck about on the farm. And that was sort of the first look into like preserving land, and like what that looks like on a local level. And then when I went to college, I thought that maybe I wanted to go into like public policy and sort of like do environmental advocacy work, but then realized that I like really loved science and like understanding how things work. So then I loved studying environmental science. And I think it was kind of like a hot topic. Like it was, I don't know, I feel like in my era, it was kind of like a new age thing to study environmental science. And it was like edgy at the time. I have no idea if that's true or not. That was my vibe. It felt cool.
Like kids are doing.
It felt cool, and it felt like the options for a career afterwards seemed really in line with like a work-life balance that I wanted, which was like spending time outside and like saving the earth. I think it also wasn't a bad thing that my husband, who was not my husband at the time, but my boyfriend, also was studying environmental science. And so it was like something that we related to very deeply, and like trying to protect the earth. It was also a period of time where like individual efforts were like really important, right? Like we were bike riding everywhere, and like, you recycled, and the individual person like felt powerful in the system to like do something about the earth warming. And so that was kind of like that set the foundation. And then after college, after I graduated with an environmental science degree, I was fortunate enough that actually it was during college that I got hooked into an environmental like outdoor education group. And so that was the best, like in my 20s, to be able to travel and take kids to national parks and teach them about environmental science, like hands-on. And so I focused, my work with Grand Classroom was at first in the Grand Canyon, which is, totally different ecosystem than what I grew up in Virginia. And geologically so cool, just like got to apply all of the science that I loved and also take kids there, which is like, there's not much more that could be cooler. And then that work led to a trip in Alaska. And so another vastly different ecosystem that I got to learn and teach, all while being like super social and getting to engage with kids. So that was kind of like the foundation of the environmental work that I started. And then from there, I loved teaching. So I went into, when I wanted to settle down and not travel all over, I decided to go into teaching and teach science to kids. And all while this is happening, my father's business, 3D Enviro, was sort of getting off the ground. And he had always kind of planted the seed, like, I've got this business, we could really use someone like you. And I just needed to find my own path and like figure out what that looked like and how I could create this business that also reflected some values that I have too. Because environmental remediation, indoor environmental remediation, is not really that sexy. It's gross. It's gross. Like asbestos and like hazmats, but I do think though the heart of it is like the mission, and the heart of it is something that's like keeps my drive going. Like, yes, it's gross. Like we're in gross places. I'm not in beautiful national parks. I'm in like old hospital buildings, but the work itself is important because it's one system, right? Like it's one system. And when we put stuff in one place, it affects other places. And so keeping these gross things out of the environment is important. And so I guess that's what keeps me going. So anyways, so that's kind of like the path of which I walked.
Yeah. That brought you to 3D. I know you were just saying a little bit about what 3D Enviro is, mainly environmental remediation, and talking though about how, like you've said, sustainability is often a trending topic or something that's made to seem like, sexy or cooler, right? It's like the panda bears and the polar bears, not so much asbestos basements. But I think you spoke to something really important, which is that it's about that we're all in a system together, and we do need to be plugged into every aspect of the system. We can't just care about the sexy stuff, right? So can you tell us, a little bit more about that mission of 3D Enviro, how sustainability is part of your mission statement, apart from just the literal work that you do?
Yeah, I think that the work that we do with 3D Enviro, and I think first as a CEO, the most important piece to me is creating a team that has like shared values. I think if you don't have a team that like supports the mission and like has an understanding, then it's not going to work. And I feel really fortunate in this small business world to have a team that is just wonderful. I mean, I can't speak enough about the team that I have. And I think we all share values, environmental values that are important. Whether that's trying to, cut back on our plastic fork use in the workroom, or using our own water bottles, to, everybody goes and vacations, all of my employees go to do cool outdoor adventures, right? Like, I have an employee who's going to the Shenandoah National Park for like a long weekend next weekend with his wife. And then another one who's going to be sailing in the Chesapeake Bay. I think that everybody loves being outside. And so the deeper understanding of the natural world, I think, is a priority to the folks that work for us, I guess is how I would phrase that. And I think it'd be really hard to not have that in my team. Like, I think it'd be really hard to have a deeper understanding. So I guess the point of that is that I feel like we're all avid environmentalists first. And then we come to our jobs. And I think that like kind of keeps us going.
And you can see that bigger picture of why this work is important, even if it does feel grueling or it doesn't. You're not seeing this big end in sight.
Yeah, but, I think, the opposite of that is that, like, my husband does work for the Nature Conservancy and is outside planting and counting. He's the director of land management, so he manages big preserves, and so his team is outside, like, counting invasive species and, like, counting native species. So there is a huge range of work in the environmental field. It's, like, massive. And so, but I do think that we all come back to, like, this work is important, and it's not outside, but like it is protecting places that we care about. So in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I wanted to ask you about motivating people, because like you're saying, the people you work with, or your husband Sam, or me too, a lot of us already have this innate desire to help the environment, or innate belief in sustainability of all living things. And so that like step towards action isn't as difficult to make, right? Because we know, even if I have to do this thing that's not so fun, like I'm doing it because I really care about the environment. And I wanted to know what your experience has been with people who maybe don't have that innate drive, and how you've come to get them to care. I think that that's something I'm asking myself a lot these days, is like, how do we get people to care? And thinking about your history with students, like often an apathetic crowd of people. So I'm just curious if you could speak to just some of that experience, or what you found motivates people or gets people to care, and I mean, also you could speak to the work you've done in 3D Enviro, because I know sometimes you have to do these presentations where you have to convince people to care that there's mercury everywhere.
I think first, kids are really malleable, right? And so like that, when I think about it's like almost a 180 from like what I'm doing now to what I was doing. Like kids, you can take and like throw that, they can be inner city kids, and you can throw them into the natural world and they're shocked. But it's also like they adjust, they're resilient. Kids are way easier than adults to open their eyes to like the beautiful world around them, and they just are more receptive to it. So I used to love taking, like, we had KIPP Academy. It was a charter school that would come, and we'd throw them into the Grand Canyon, and first there's like, the 5 stages of grief. Like there's like shock and terror, disbelief. And then there's like this acclimation, and kids like go through that process so quickly. And then they love it. Like they love it. And so even if that kid walks away with some understanding that like, this is cool and we have to protect these cool places, like I won. Right. And part of that is like giving them knowledge, but also having fun. It's way easier with kids. Like kids are so easy. And then in the classroom, like when I was a science teacher, that was more challenging, right? Like when you're in the natural world, it's like, this is cool. But then when you're in a classroom, like that was more challenging. One thing in my classroom that I'm always been an agitator, So like in the classroom, maybe that's the right word. I would take my kids outside all the time, and there was always pushback from administration. Like, well, what are you doing out there? I'm like, well, we're just going outside because we want to see stuff. I'd always have my blinds open. It drove me nuts. It's still to this day when I go into my kids' classrooms and the blinds are closed tight. I'm like, no, we got to open this up. My whole room was plastered with pictures of national parks. Like every single space, every square inch was covered with pictures of national parks from all over the United States. And it was really hard when you're not tangibly in a place. It's harder to get people to care. And now in the adult world, adults are hard. Unfortunately for the business, my tactic has always been giving people knowledge first and helping them understand how it affects them. So like something tangible like mercury, this is something that's every single water system and fish and, is almost affected by mercury. I mean, there are mercury warnings for almost every waterway in every state. And I think that that's a really valuable thing to look at. I mean, the state of Maryland has a really cool website that gives you, walks you through every single local waterway and like the mercury warnings on it. And so even just Maryland alone, you can look at that map and it's shocking, so I think letting people know that this actually is a problem and it's a local problem, right? Like it's not just a national problem, but it is a local problem. I think has been the best tactic, because unless you live in a hole, you have heard of mercury warnings in fish and especially the predatory fish. And so that is a tangible way to connect to people. And people are always really interested when I get to that slide in my presentation. Like, well, this is why we're doing this work. Like when you put it in the environment, it doesn't go away. It actually gets worse.
And so it comes back to it.
Right. And it comes back to you. Right. And here are all the problems that we know mercury causes. So I think in my work with adults, it's providing education. They have to be receptive though. So, it's like, this is the problem with the world today, is like making sure that it's an education that feels tangible and not isolating, that opens a conversation instead of making people feel like they're doing something terribly wrong. Because most of the time they're not, right? Like most of the time the mercury in the environment is not from you being a jerk and not recycling, right? Like, so it does make it feel more approachable, I think.
Yeah. It's so interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about, you were saying how it's so much easier to get people motivated when they're directly in touch with the natural world, because like they're looking at the things that are beautiful. You can't deny the emotion you feel looking at like a beautiful mountain range. And I think that, speaking to really is what ultimately motivates people, right? Like more so than I think logic. And I don't know, just thinking about how, like what you're saying, our lives more than ever are contained within buildings and contained within our space and removed from the natural world. And I almost wonder if that is connected to maybe some of the like apathy or just lack of action that we have collectively. I know there is lots of action happening, but why maybe not every single person's on board, because we're just removed from these these natural processes, this understanding of the natural world and like the experience of the natural world and how life-giving and impactful it can be for us as human beings to just go into nature. Like you said, I feel like for people, there's so many people who've like never even gone camping before, never had that experience of standing alone in the woods and being like, I'm so small. And I don't know, that makes me sad. It's making me think about like, we need to get people outside more.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. If I could just put a plug in, I just finished reading this book that I passed on. I don't know if I passed it on to you, Fran, but I passed it on to Gus. And definitely, my husband's currently reading it. It's called The Comfort Crisis, and it's by Michael Easter. And it's basically, I think it's called The Comfort Crisis, Embrace Discomfort and Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self. And a lot of the research, he's does a lot of outdoor research and like how it affects your brain. And so he like really digs into how important nature is for our brains, and like looks a lot of the like at the Japanese research of nature bathing and like how important it is for our development. And I think one of the stats he gives, and I'm going to botch it exactly, but New York City is like one of the most unhappiest cities on the planet. And yet, and they are trying to make links between that and its lack of nature and what that does to our brains. And so anyways, I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. There's also tons of research out of Japan about just like how good nature is for our bodies, and bringing elderly people who have heart issues out into a park for 30 minutes a day, and like what that does to their blood pressure, and like all these really significant data points of how important it is to actually be outside. And there are different levels too. So like, the base level is 3 times a week for 20 minutes to be outside in nature. And that can be urban nature, and that's like the first level. And that's like just to be somewhat healthy and have your brain function.
Wow. So this is like almost like a dietary guideline.
It's like the food pyramid for nature. The second level of that.
That exists.
Yeah. And then the second level of that is once a month being in a more rural nature for 5 hours. And this is like, the prescription for this is all coming from Japanese research. The prescription for this is also like no phones. Like you can't have your phone. There's no technology in order for it to be fully restorative for your health and brain. And then finally is the 3 days in remote, as remote as possible, to do like a full, cleanse, if you will, and like really reset your brain. So anyways, it's really interesting research, and I would highly recommend, I know National Geographic had a big study on this nature bathing probably a couple of years ago. It's been out for a while. And Michael Easter's book that came out during COVID is also fantastic. But I do think that it is something we're not talking about enough, and how important the disconnect, or like how much there is a disconnect. And certainly for me, raising children in this world, all of that data is like super important to me, because there's not one day that we're not bombarded by technology, and we're busier than ever, but yet, we don't have time to rest and really enjoy being outside. So it's something for me to try to keep in the back of my mind with my kids. So
yeah. Sometimes though it stinks. It almost feels like you have to sort of fight the tide. It's so powerful trying to draw us all into our devices. But sure. I'm so interested to hear about that research you were saying, because I was just learning about earthing, and I'd heard about it, which is just going and putting your feet or your hands or like your skin onto the ground. You might have heard about it, but I heard about it and I was like, yeah, this is a cool thing. It's great. What could be bad about going to touch your skin to the earth? Sounds like a great thing. And then I saw this research that was actually done by the NIH, and it was talking about all of these people who had like different cardiovascular and circulatory disorders, and how them doing an earthing practice literally reduced the inflammation and like wound healing and like balanced the electrons in their body, which I feel like that almost sounds woo-woo, even though it's very scientific, but It just was so, it was so amazing to me because I was like, wow, this thing that is kind of joked about as like a cookie crunchy thing. You know, I remember at lunch in college, there was a group of people who would be like, we're going to go Earth right now. And we'd all go and stand on the quad and like just hold hands in a circle in Earth. But it's amazing how these things, like there is this deep intuitive wisdom in our humanity that knows that we like need to do these things for both these intangible reasons and also these like really tangible reasons related to health. And that's just so, I don't know, so fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating. And I also think it's like I feel fortunate that I feel like I'm sort of like in the know and have like a look into this and how important it is. And so I think there are truly people who have no idea how important this is.
Yeah.
And so I feel really fortunate that it's something that I care about and something that I have designed my life around to try to have easy access to nature any place I go. So, which is a privilege, you know, a huge privilege.
Yeah, I think that that's something that I really struggle with these days is just how it feels like living a life in line with sustainability or you know with just consideration and care requires so much individual research in a way, and you really have to advocate for your own life and your own beliefs because we don't live in a society that automatically integrates those practices for us. But you know, with that being said, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, you know, in your work of educating people and trying to get them to care and, you know, how do you balance this how do you balance the negative with the positive? Because obviously there's a lot of negative that's happening and people need to know that, right?
Yeah.
But there's a limit to that, right? That can become paralyzing. And so I don't know if you could speak to that. I know that that's sort of your, I don't want to say like greatest skill, but in a way it is. I feel like your humanism and your understanding of people and what motivates them is so powerful. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. I certainly, I think this like resonates with me really hard because of being a mom, right? Like, and bringing humans, you know, any environmentalist will say like struggle in their brain about bringing kids into this world, right? Like, it's you know, I think anyone who is in the environmental field is like, well, why would we do this? Why would we bring more people to destroy this earth into the world? And it's something that I grappled with. It's something Sam definitely grappled with. And yet we did it anyway. Life found a way. Biology found a way. You know, and I do think, but it does raise an interesting question. And I think with kids, and especially teaching kids about climate change, can be so upsetting and frustrating. And like from the mouth of babes, right? Like, well, why are we doing it that way, mom? Like, that seems stupid. I'm like, yeah, you nailed it. Like, why don't we just change it? Like, why can't we do it differently? You know? And so there is a piece of frustration. And there are a lot of like really funny kids books, and they're not funny. Like they're funny because they're kids books, but like, I think one that I just read to Peter the other day, my 3-year-old, is like the greatest tantrum that ever happened or something like that. And it's like, this kid basically throws a huge temper tantrum in the state capitol about climate change. And like, sometimes you have to get angry and sometimes you have to protest. Is that working? I think that's what is frustrating, right? Like there's not policy change on a large level. On the industrial scale, there does need to be huge change. Like the individual action at this point, it is important. And I don't want to downplay that. But like it also, as we know, has to be at a higher level. And I think that's what's motivating for me as a business owner is that you must be the change you wish to see in the world, right? Like that in both your personal life, but also your business. You know, sustainability is tangible on so many levels. You don't have to be an environmental group or company in order to have sustainability. I think that's the whole point, right? Is that like, we've got to make changes on a larger scale in order for anything to happen. And I think it's possible. it's really freaking frustrating. And I think also with kids, it can be really disheartening to say, I don't know why it's this way and it's dumb. And, all we can do is be good humans and try to push this change. And I remember my dad saying, like, your generation's going to be the one to change it, Lauren. Like, you guys are going to do it. And now I feel like I'm saying that to my daughter. And I'm like, what in the hell? We missed the boat. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But
there has been, just, a little positive. There has obviously been huge changes between your generation and your parents' generation and your daughter Leland's generation and your generation. I think it's like, it's sometimes hard to parse these things out because we also have more information than ever. So I feel like anytime there's a win, there's like 30 news stories of like, the world, this is happening and it's terrible. And you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But I do feel like, I do feel really hard because it's funny. I remember like my parents saying that to me too, like your generation's going to change. And we unfortunately, I feel like I'm like, oh, we kind of failed. Like we're already old enough now. The new kids got to come in. But I do feel like so impassioned by just the heart and intelligence and knowledge of the young people I see on the internet. I feel like they really are, sticking to these extremely complicated and like macro issues and recognizing their role in it and also their inability to like solve it without collective action. Yeah, I think for me in my journey through sustainability as well, it was a lot more about individual action. Like a lot more was focused on that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's really important to express to people like live your life with integrity regardless of the outcome of it, right? Like do what you think is good for the earth, even if it is a drop in the bucket.
Sure.
But I feel like now so many kids, are saying like, we can't do this alone. This can't just be us. This can't just be the individual. Like we need to have serious advocacy. And so I don't know, that makes me a little
right? I think with that, it empowers me because it is super complicated and it is multifaceted. And I think like there is no silver bullet, right? Like there is no silver bullet. And even within the environmental world, like there, it's like, you can't put a solar farm here because then this invasive species is going to thrive because you're mowing everything down. You can't put the wind farm here because migratory birds are here. And so even within the environmental world, there is debate and problems. For me, though, I think it's motivating because it is multifaceted. And so there are smaller prongs that matter. And so therefore, my work with 3D Enviro, are we out there saving woodpeckers? No. Like, are we out there saving forests? No. Like, but it's multifaceted and like the work that I'm doing does matter. And I think that that's where we have to like give a nod and say like, yes, there are many prongs and this is one of them. This is a tiny little piece of it, but it motivates me to keep going. And I think my employees too.
That you said that. I don't know. I just love that you said that. Because like it is. I don't know. It is. We are all so interconnected in ways that are impossible for us to, I think, grasp at times. But
I think it's really interesting. This, like, I keep coming back to this. Like, I keep thinking about this. I took this class in college, and it was a geography class. I was like, what is like geography? Like I was thinking like, this is going to be about like where countries are. And like, no, it was actually like a systems, like an environmental systems. It was like environmental geography. And so it like talked about the world systems and like how everything is connected to like evaporation on the equator that forms weather systems throughout the whole world, water currents in the ocean and how those connect weather. It's like your body. It's so fascinating to me and mind-blowing and scary. If something's wrong in your body, it's a whole system. And we have, especially in America, we have specialists, right? Who are only looking at this one tiny little piece of your body. But like really it's a system as a whole that needs to be cultivated. And it's also the same thing for the planet. So cultivating one place could help something else. And I think there are really smart people out there who understand that, but it's really something that the American public should understand more. Everybody on the planet should understand more.
Yeah.
But
that's such a good parallel, the human body and the earth. I like that idea of it is the way we approach medicine is very similar to the way we approach our environmental problems often too, where it's like, there's a fire in California, let's go put it out. Oh, now this is happening. There's a hurricane in Florida, let's go drain it out. And it's like, this is all a system that's happening together. We can't just keep going boop, 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 boop. I remember that too, though, in the first environmental science class I took, where they talked about ocean mixing and how the different temperatures across the globe affect ocean mixing and drop all of these nutrients that are like in the deep Arctic seas that we to like fertilize the Great Plains or all this crazy stuff. And I was like, this is so wild that the entire ocean's completely mixed. I think like every 200 years or something, like not that long. And I mean, when you think about that, like anytime I even, I live in Florida and I go and I stand on the beach and I'm standing in the water and I'm like, this water has touched the entire earth. Like it's so amazing and so impactful and so terrifying and so empowering. And I don't know.
Complicated. Like it's complicated and it's crazy. We don't even understand the human body, let alone the planet. And I think there's just a lot that we're still, it's always fascinating to me, like how much we're still learning. And how complicated these systems are. I mean, it is fascinating to me. And I think that's why I went into environmental science, because it was fascinating. And just a world of wonder.
I feel like that mindset, though, I almost wonder if like your background in teaching and the knowledge that this need to kind of like inject curiosity in everything in order to like keep people going isn't also a really great business tactic or just attitude that you can take into your work in saying like, how can I approach this with curiosity? Or like, how can I ask a better question? Or how can I understand this person better? That's how we're going to make change, or that's how we're going to get people to care or understand or know where they even are on their own journey.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I said before, I think a lot of the work that I do is also about education. And so, I think people have a lot of questions, especially about our mercury remediation. Like, well, what is it? Why do you do it? And so a lot of it is providing information on the importance of it. And that's hard. It's hard because it makes it hard to grow your business, but also the people that care do care. And so, so we have been, I think for a small business, we've been successful because we have found pockets that care. So,
so I wanna speak to you a little bit more about that advocacy work that you've done. I know that, or we all know, obviously, science is a male-dominated industry. I think that's been changing in recent years, but or changing definitely, but it still is a male-dominated industry. Obviously, you're a woman, you're a mom. I know that you took over this company from your father. And so, you've been in a lot of male dominated spaces in this industry. When you started out in this work, I know you were a young woman in your 20s. Can you speak to a little bit about what that journey has been like, holding an identity that isn't necessarily expected or welcome to the table in these spaces? And then being a leader in that space and saying like, hey, you actually have to listen to me and I'm the person who knows best.
I mean, a couple, go ahead. Oh, no, I was just going to say like a couple of things come to mind about like my journey of being a woman in an environmental field that is male dominated. I mean, we do environmental remediation. So like it is a male dominated field. I think more and more companies are trying to have female owners. And I just like looked at one of our competitors and now they're woman owned, which is great. And so I do find this trend that there are more women. I think one thing that comes to mind, and I think maybe it's because I started in my 20s, and this could just be like the age at which I've, gone through my professional life, but like all of the American cultural things that are pressed upon women as they age have really come to the forefront of my mind. So like when I was in my 20s, I mean, I was in my late 20s, but I definitely was the youngest person in the room. I was the only female. And so it was a selling point because people remembered me. So like in that regard, it was helpful because they're like, well, who is that? Like, who is this, 30-year-old woman in this room? Right. But then at the same side, the double-edged sword of that is like multiple times I was asked like, oh, can you take notes for this meeting? Can you keep notes for this, sweetheart?
Yeah.
Can you be the someone was like, oh, are you the secretary? I'm like,
oh my God.
So I think any woman in any industry could probably say things similarly to that. But I do think it was a double-edged sword. So it was both like people noticed, and then people also had condescending comments as well. I think that it's an important piece of my identity as a woman in business, and also finding other women in business. And it doesn't have to be the environmental field, but like I have surrounded myself with other women-owned businesses. And no matter what business it is, there are similar things that happen as you like progress in your business, and also talking to other women. Like it's like a support group, right? Like I have a business CEO group, and the other women in there, and men, but the other women in there have become like some of my best friends because we all, mom, we all run a business, and there are all very similar things that happen. So that's been a really important piece to me as I've run this and learned. But it is definitely a strong culture. And I will say that there are things that are really hard for me as I continue to age, and just like how society and how our culture, how women are supposed to be, and they're supposed to be youthful, and they're supposed to look youthful. And, I started young. And so it is like, who's this young woman in this group? So that is part of the identity of 3D is, this random woman walking around these gross places in a hard hat and steel-toed boots. It's very much a construction site, and I'm on there, walking around with a lot of these guys. But I will say that more and more women are being badass, and I see you out there, women.
Yes.
And young women too, like young women. Like I think there's been a real push for a lot of large construction firms. We just did a big project with like one of the largest construction firms, and I was so impressed with some of the women that they had on staff, and also just the language that they used. Like it was woke, and it was good. Like it was like very inclusive, and I walked away with my business partner and we're like, oh, we got to use that phrase from now on. Like we got that's a good phrase. Like, we've got to address people this way. So I do think that there are young people who care, who are becoming involved in the workforce, who are making changes that will be significant. And that gives me some hope for our future.
It's very, I know, right? I'm like, the young people, we're really, not to put too much pressure on them again, but
no pressure, but pressure. Yeah, but I also think, in that regard, just to nod at our political situation, clearly we are still young because like, look at the people who are running our government. And I think we still have a lot of years left, Fran, to like make an impact. And I think we are considered young still. So I think in that regard, I think we've got lots of years ahead of us to play the game.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Yeah. Like let's get some people who are like 60 years old in government.
Yeah, exactly. Like
we're like 50,
just a touch.
One day. But let's just start with like retirement age first, and then
exactly.
So earlier as you were sharing about your experience being a woman in leadership and connecting with other women in leadership spaces. And you were you said something about how you see similar trends or similar decisions being made in a women-owned business. And I was wondering if you could speak to that perspective that you've noticed, you know, that you've brought to the table that maybe other firms aren't doing? And what do you find, you know, what do you find is lost in these discussions when we limit the voices that are shared and the actors that are in power as we're making these decisions?
I think overall, and I definitely have men CEOs that are wonderful and just so great. And there have been, you know, a couple of men CEOs in my CEO group who have been just like amazing and such a good compass for me. But I will say that the women that I know, I think what I find when I speak to other women business owners is the key word that I would say is compassion. I think what I find is that, you know, more understanding policies on family leave and medical and pregnancy and childcare, you know, if we think about who, you know, basically like unpaid work that women have done for centuries in this country, all over the world, these are all like similar, like childcare is like a huge issue. And balancing how to raise kids and work is 2 full-time jobs. I mean, it's 2 full-time jobs. So that piece, I think it gives you compassion for your employees in a different way. And not that men don't experience that, because I definitely think they do, right? Like they do. And being a dad, it, like, you know, it gives you compassion for sure. But I think overall, the women that I see, like there is a visceral response to it that's like, I get this is important, we need to value this, and just much more of an emotional understanding of a whole person, that it's not just you're clocking in at work and here you're my employee and these are your roles that you need to complete and check off, but like a more well-rounded approach to being a human and taking care of people, is what I would say for the workforce. And I think that's, you know, the trend I see when I see women CEOs. So it's like your employees are whole people and emotionally connecting with them, you know, and this is obviously a small sample size, so I have no idea. There could be terrible women out there that own businesses. But this is my experience. Yeah, this is my experience in the women CEOs that I know. And I really think it's motivating to me. It's motivating, and it's hard. Like it's hard. I think things are getting way better than like my mom's generation. You know, my mom worked full time. She was a nurse. She was a nurse practitioner. And so, you know, I think and certainly there were more than nurses and teachers in my mom's generation, but not my grandmother's generation. I mean, my grandmother was a nurse, and you could be a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. Like those are the 3 things you could do. And I think every generation there are different things. And I think in my mom's generation, it was do it all and don't suffer. Like you can't talk about your suffering. Like you just do it.
Don't complain.
Don't complain. You just do it. And this is what it is. And at least it's better than our mom's generation, you know, my grandmother's generation. But there was a lot of silent suffering, and it is a lot to hold, to be a mom and to be to work generally. And I think the balance between family and work as a mom, I guess I only know my experience, but I just know that it's a common trend between other women CEOs. You got to build your village, build your team, because it takes a village. And I think that a lot of, you know, people that I talk to, it is a constant struggle on, you know, what values you hold and trying to execute those things, like being a good mom and like what that means. Does that mean you need to pick your kid up to soccer practice and drive them across town? I don't know. It's so individualized. But I do know that the other women CEOs also have a stacked village and team that they build. And that's the only way that we can do this is together.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's making me think about, like, you know, being a parent, being a mother is this deep knowledge of how to sustain life, and how that perspective and understanding just gives you a holistic perspective that then you can translate out to the environment to your every decision, to your business decision. And, I think a lot when we talk about sustainability, it's really emphasized on environmental sustainability, like the literal natural environment, the non-living and living parts of the environment, and not often, I think, centered around like community sustainability or like human sustainability in a way, and thinking about like, yes, we want to create an earth that where all living things can flourish, but also we want to create an earth where we as humans can flourish, and where all human beings can have self-determination, where we're not making decisions that, like, I don't know, thinking about the way that marginalized communities are always put next to landfills, or, like these things that facilities so inherently intertwined with like the human condition. And
I think it's like a really, I mean, just in you talking, like, I will be the first to acknowledge that like the environmental problems that are affecting people are the lowest economic, group of people, that these environmental conditions, putting a landfill next to, an underprivileged neighborhood, that's commonplace. Like everywhere in the world, you're seeing all these environmental disasters in places. I mean, that's not totally, the earth doesn't care if you're rich or poor. But I will say that humans care, and it had certainly, like, we have decided where things go, and certainly I will just acknowledge that I am a white privileged person and don't understand firsthand, what that's like. So I guess I would just put that out there, that in my
I mean, of course, and same here also. But I do think though that, like, I guess that, you saying that is really inspiring to me, because I think that if, we need to understand like how to care for human beings too, and we need to know how to sustain human life as part of this whole, as part of the entire like sustainability and environmentally conscious initiative. And I think to me it's so, I don't know, impactful or beautiful, not to be cheesy, but to think about how that intimate knowledge that you gain or that experience through motherhood, of how to sustain this unbelievably vulnerable, complicated, fragile thing, how that can, profoundly shape your actions and your decision making, that then creates these like reverberation effects where everyone can be healthy and happy and have self-determination. And I'm gonna botch this, there's some quote by this like female psychologist I'll have to put after in the notes, but it's basically like, if you meet the needs of children and mothers in society, the needs of every single person in society are met. And that to me is just like always like, but like not just of human mothers, but like animals as well. Like if we can meet the needs of the babies and the mothers of the world, then we're all going to be taken care of.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful statement. And I feel biased because it's only my experience, but I do think that being a mom and also running a business is, I think that's why I feel so close to the other CEO moms, because the things we all talk about are the same experience, and like how hard it is, the pressures we feel. There are just things that moms do that, why we do them, I don't know. Like maybe it's biological, I have no idea, but they all seem to be similar feelings. And I do think that it brings more compassion into the workplace, having women's. I also think moms get shit done. Like I love hiring new moms, because like they do everything in half the amount of time because they're efficient. They're like, no, I've got this time, I'm going to do this. And so they're like just highly motivated.
Because I feel like that's the most, like, I've never heard anybody, most people be like, I would never want to hire a new mom.
Oh, but no, I'm like, give me all the new moms. Like it's crazy. I think that they are just like, they realize how to prioritize their time and like do things really efficiently. Like when you're taking care of someone in something, I think you have these windows of time, naps. You have these windows of time where you like ninja around like crazy person, trying to get shit done. So yeah, I'm like, give me all the new moms to hire because I feel like they get things done really efficiently. So,
well, Lauren, it has been such a great conversation. I know we're nearing the end of our time.
I'm also getting a text from our babysitter that Peter has a fever. So that's why I was like glanced down at my phone when speaking of mom responsibilities. I'm like, I'll be in a second.
All right. Well, I will get you wrapped up here so you can
it's fine.
do it.
We got time.
Yeah. But before we go, I mean, yeah, I first do just want to say thank you so much. This has been such an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation, and I hope that, I hope everyone, you, the listener, can come away feeling hopeful and maybe with a few little action items on your mind. Go hug your mom.
Yeah, go hug your mom. Tell her she's doing a good job. Yeah, go outside. Put your hands in nature.
Yes. Touch the earth, do some earthing.
You need to be outside. Put your phone down.
Exactly. No phone zone. Lauren, as you know, for each podcast guest that we have, we've asked them to choose an area of the world in which they would like to plant a native tree to help with ecosystem restoration and biodiversity. This is part of the initiative of One Tree Planted, which is an organization that's really cool and everybody should go check out. They, people are always saying we need to plant more trees, and rather than just planting a bunch of Bradford pears, they plant native trees that the ecosystem and environment actually need. So with that being said, I wanted to ask you if you've given a little bit of thought to which region you would like to plant your tree in.
Yeah, I first love this idea. I love this so much. I will say that the work my husband Sam does as the director of land management, I think he has. I haven't made a decision yet because I needed to connect with him on it. I thought about the region, obviously locally doing something in Appalachia, but I do think that there are probably regions who need trees more than we do. And I love this idea and I love this mission and I love that Peaceful has decided to do this, but I have not figured out exactly where I want my tree to go. So I need to report back on that one. I'd like to talk to Sam about it because I feel like he actually probably would have a better understanding of, what tree where than I do. That's his specialty. Yeah. So I wanted to converse with him and report back to Peaceful on it.
Yes, well, just report back to me. I'm excited to hear about Sam's expert opinion.
Yeah, I am too. So I'm always learning from him about, different trees and where they should be planted and what species are going to thrive and how that helps their ecosystem. So he certainly is very knowledgeable in Virginia. I don't know about Appalachia as a whole, but Virginia, he's certainly the one to talk to about it. So
yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah, thanks, Fran.
I look forward to hearing his. I know. I mean, maybe he should give us a little advice.
No, I think it's a great mission, and I think they're probably utilizing experts on the ground as well. So everything looks so great, and I'm so glad Peaceful has reached out to plant the trees, but also reached out, and I feel very fortunate to have gotten to talk to you for the last hour. So
well, thank you. I mean. Really, really same here, Lauren. It's always so inspiring to talk to you. I feel like I feel your passion and your authenticity, and it's just always such a great conversation. Is there anything before we go? Is there anything any other last things that you want to say? Anything that you want to leave us with? I know that's kind of a hard question, actually. So you can also say no.
That's a big one, Fran. There's lots of things I'd like to say. No, I feel like I just appreciate the work that Peaceful is doing. And I appreciate someone taking the time to listen to my story and making me feel empowered in my mission. It makes me look back to days where it's not so fun to be doing the work that I'm doing and makes it sort of worthwhile. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that insightfulness that you gave me. And I'm going to go kick some ass the rest of the day. So
yeah, you are. I love that.
So cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. We'll talk soon.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to our podcast, Marketing for What Matters. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, or Pandora. Love the show? Leave us a review and follow us on social media at Peaceful Media to stay up to date about new episodes. And as always, thank you to this earth for giving us all we've ever needed. See you next time.